Okay, today we are going over one of the most obscure categories in all of Halo's speedrunning, and the speedrunning route for this is unlike anything you've ever seen in all of Halo speedrunning. Like, things straight up get a little goofy at times, but let's back up to the beginning. Halo speedruns have always been something incredibly intriguing to me. Seeing players utilize some amazing tricks and strategies to bring the overall time of a game down to a fraction of how the game was originally intended to be played is really interesting. But one thing I thought was incredibly interesting is when Halo Infinite released, for the first time ever, a Halo game could be beaten from beginning to end in under 30 minutes. Now, while it's incredibly impressive, mind you, Halo Infinite's speedruns typically bypass multiple levels. So what if there was a way you could possibly beat a Halo game beginning to end without straight up skipping entire levels? How fast could you really go? Halo 3 ODST is obviously the first Halo game that comes to mind, just because generally speaking the campaign is the shortest of all of the Halo games. And if we look at the speedrunning leaderboards on Halo runs, we do see that Halo 3 ODST easy difficulty has been beaten in 57 minutes and 14 seconds by Wingman 953. It is also worth noting that Halo Reach has been beaten under an hour by Reclusive, and just barely Halo 3 under an hour has been done by Binails. But looking past Halo Infinite and focusing in on the fastest Halo games, or the shortest Halo games, I started falling down this rabbit hole of just looking into Halo 3 ODST speedruns, specifically tuning into Wingman's streams and just generally being impressed. I mean, Wingman has some really unique strategies that I don't even know how I would be able to replicate if I ever tried to get into ODST speedrunning, like using pressure to speed up your movement on Teari Plaza, hijacking Banshees on Kazinga Boulevard in a frame-perfect hijack so the Banshee doesn't explode, or surfing on a Phantom to get your Banshee out of bounds on Kikawani Station. It's all really impressive to watch. And in general, the speedrunning community in MCC is definitely worthwhile watching if you're ever on Twitch. But then I started wondering, what if we took this idea a step further? What if you had everything at your grasp for Halo 3 ODST speedrunning? What is the absolute shortest time anybody could get? So then that brought me into the rabbit hole of Halo 3 ODST co-op speedrunning. Hark the Shark, Phobic, Dice, and 2Easy had managed to get the overall time to complete ODST down to 54 minutes and 30 seconds. But then that got me wondering, what if things could get even quicker with ODST? And that brings us to June 13th, 2022. Some of you may remember a couple of months ago, we uploaded a video where Luke and I, and Dim occasionally, decided to just go look into Halo Run categories that didn't have anybody playing in the categories and just run them and see if maybe more interest would be garnered for certain categories. We decided to run the Halo 3 ODST Acrophobia category, which allows you to use any of the skulls, including Acrophobia, which allows you to literally fly through the game. And we did a few playthroughs and pretty much just submitted our time of us going fast, which was 52 minutes and 45 seconds, where that record would stand for a few days after our video went out before being beaten. And this is where the history of one of the most obscure speedrunning categories in all of Halo begins. Before we get further into this video though, we do not have a sponsor lined up today, so we're plugging our Patreon. So far, we've managed to raise $500 from our supporters to help us make content like this. So if you want to join the community of people going above and beyond to help us make this type of content and get your name at the end of the videos, maybe you could consider throwing a couple of dollars our way to really help us continue to make content like this. Our goal is to reach $2,000 by next summer. It's a pretty hefty goal, but that would help Luke and I both continue to make this type of content as frequently as we do. So if you guys want to help out, it would mean the world to us. We do get notifications on our phone every time someone signs up. It's always cool to be like, hey, look, this person just threw $3 our way. So maybe take a look at our Patreon if you have some free time at the end of this video or something. But I'm not going to overdo it here. Let's go ahead and get back into this video. A couple of days after our speedrun time was posted, a couple of people in the Halo speedrunning community noticed and decided to take a crack at Halo 3 ODST Acrophobia. These runners were Rylum, Trouble, Vulture, Voltron Eon, and Mythic, and Rylam already had a lot of experience in regular ODST speedrunning, so he was able to kind of throw together a better route than what we used on the fly and got the group together to start running ODST. Right away, having experience being in the speedrunning community definitely played a part in their run here, as Rylam pulls off a lot of really interesting acrophobia speedrunning tricks that we were definitely too inexperienced to try to pull off in an actual run, and also to try to quickly learn them and apply them at the same time. So in this run, we do see some really cool tricks, like on Uplift Reserve, the quick break through the barrier with the Warthog and flying out of bounds to save a couple of seconds is big here. They actually knew their way through Mombasa streets, which was more than all of us could say in our side of things. On Oni Alpha Site, there's a really interesting strategy that Rylam uses, which is used in individual level runs, that allows you to fly up the side of the building and get to the top, bypassing a lot of the entire firefight section inside. And we'll talk a little bit more about this specific trick in a little bit. They also used a trick on Kazinga Boulevard to hijack a Banshee and fly over the wall, which skips this huge holdout section. And then on Coastal Highway, since Rylam had run ODST in the past, he did know the triggers for the out of bounds section, where if you launch a Warthog out of bounds and use it to break through the barrier to continue to fly out of bounds, you can essentially bypass the entirety of the highway part of the level as long as you're hitting all the loads in order, which was way beyond our comprehension in our very first video, just trying to see how fast we could beat ODST. But since we had made that video where we were just picking up first places wherever there wasn't times submitted on Halo runs, after their run was posted, I was incredibly intrigued with some of these tricks. They had a 43:55, which was like 9 entire minutes better than our time. And over the next couple of days, I found myself continuously coming back to watching their runs and just seeing some of the tricks that they did and how they did the tricks. And then I started wondering, what if Dim, Luke, and I put some effort into this? Could we have a comparable time to what they were able to get? Or could we even beat their time with enough practice? A big thing I noticed watching Rylam, Trouble, Voltron Eon, and Mythic's run was the fact that all of their practice and runs were probably done in the same day, as there's a lot of big time losses that happened when a trick didn't work and they had to reset to the beginning of the level. And I tried to figure that if we could recreate or learn some of these tricks and then just grind for a deathless version of what they did, maybe we could actually have a comparable time. And thus, the journey of practicing and learning some of these tricks would begin. I was able to get the Oni sight trick down after a little bit of trial and error and trying to figure out how to handle the respawn points on this, because it does just seem like full RNG. Kazinga Boulevard, I, with the controller for sure, could not for the life of me figure out how to hijack a Banshee that's moving at full speed. So instead, we actually routed our own way around this, where we figured out where the load sequences were and did an out of bounds trick to bypass the part that you normally would want to fly over the wall with a Banshee. It actually worked out really well and was faster than the Banshee strategy, which we'll go over also later in this video when we go to the full run. The Uplift Reserve trick I actually had managed to pull off right before our video had gone up, so I was already a little familiar with that trick. And then there was Coastal Highway, which this level was definitely one of the hardest levels to learn, because you have to be so precise with how your character's movement is when you're hitting the loading triggers to continuously have the level load forward, that if you mess up, it'll just teleport you inside and essentially kill your trick on the run, putting you at whatever point you are in the level. I mean, it has to be so specific. It can be so annoying and frustrating. There was a lot of trial and error we've learned along the way, where sometimes just we didn't load the level incorrectly and Dare would just be in a free fall inside of the dumpster and eventually would die and we'd fail the mission. Yeah, we learned a lot about how Halo 3 ODST works here. But eventually, after practicing a lot with the group, and then I also spent a lot of time practicing solo, if we could get a run where we could get the Warthog out of bounds without just flinging off the side, and if Dim could get the launch correctly, we were feeling pretty confident that we at least had a competitive chance to try possibly to take back the crown on this category. After quite a bit of practice and maybe about 10 days in total of trying to craft this together and then get a run that actually made it to the end, we finally did manage to break their time pretty much using the same strategies that they had, just we went for a run with minimized deaths and mess ups and would start over if we messed up. We ended up beating their time by about 7 minutes. Now, to be fair, they just jumped on one day and kind of went with their second run attempt of the day. And we spent a lot more time really just trying to improve our skills, but we were feeling really good after finally beat a record that was beaten by actual speedrunners. We got the record on July 7th, and by July 9th, our record was gone. So speedrunners Dice, Hark, Zephreich, and Astervales decided to take a crack at the Acrophobia speedrun. Now, this group of speedrunners all have their own lengthy claims to fame when it comes to Halo running, and Hark the Shark also has a reputation of really just knowing Halo 3 ODST inside and out. Now, rumor has it Hark had been already, prior to all of this stuff going on, theory crafting a really fast Acrophobia ODST speedrun, and they did tip us off that they were eyeing to try to get the run under 30 minutes. I just didn't expect them to do it in literally 2 days. So these guys went and took a 37:03, which was our time, and brought it all the way down 9 minutes to 28 minutes 36 seconds. And I'll be honest, for the next following days, I was like, hey, you know what? We learned a bit about speedrunning. More people are starting to populate the Acrophobia playlists for individual levels. Speedrunner BB12 even submitted the first ever solo Acrophobia speedrun onto the website. And looking at how impressive the new speedrun for co-op Acrophobia was, we really didn't think that this would be something we would ever be able to get fast enough to run anymore. But then I started to spend the next couple of days really looking over the co-op speedrun just to see how they managed to trim off so much time from our time. It was actually really impressive, and it goes to show having knowledge in the game that you're actually running can help create brand new strategies that no one's ever necessarily tried before. At the very beginning of the game on Prepare to Drop, they save a ton of time by manipulating the spawns and spawn clip through a wall. Then they go quickly out of bounds and clipped back through the window in reverse to hit the TV. Across the following levels, Teari, Uplift, Oni, Kazinga, everything was just really clean and accurate across the board, and also cut a lot of fluff out from not being as experienced like our team was. If you compare the co-op runs that they had to the solo individual level records, a lot of the time they were either tied for the fastest possible time, or they just had a really fast time in general. NMPD HQ is a really interesting level because you have this firefight section at the end that at the surface doesn't look like you can do too much to speed it along, yet somehow this group was able to get a 3 minute and 3 second time on that. Mind you, Hark and Astervales have the co-op time on this level without Acrophobia at 4:19. So a 3 minute and 3 second time seemed beyond crazy. I had no idea how they managed to pull that one off. And then they had a really clean run through the end of the game, utilizing some interesting out of bounds things on Kikawani Station, and then spawn bumping through the door on Coastal Highway and just flying through the out of bounds section faster than I've ever seen it done before. But still, this was an incredible run to watch, and while there's always this little competitive nerve if you've submitted times on Halo runs, it's really cool to see something like this executed so well. What I actually shifted to doing after this is I started working on my individual level runs to not only get more practice on Coastal Highway, but I kind of started to get into possibly throwing some attempts at going for solo ODST Acrophobia just because I really enjoyed just zooming through ODST. I actually ended up setting up my computer that's from like 2015, but it can run MCC, so I could start using mouse and keyboard. And during this time, Rylum actually submitted a 33:25 solo Acrophobia run, which was incredibly fast. For the same reasons I was praising that co-op run, it was really cool to see a solo route executed so well. So then I kind of just fell into this rabbit hole of individually practicing every level and just trying to get my times better. I had this whole Excel sheet set up where I would just try to refine my times and top my personal best times until all of my personal best times were close enough to what Rylum's overall run time was. And once I finally had my PBs matching what Rylum's overall run was, I decided I would just start going to see if I could get a run straight through where eventually I was faster. It pretty much took me almost a month of grinding away and trying to perfect some of these strategies before I was able to even get close to catching up to Rylam's time. There were a few interesting tricks though that did eventually contribute to the tides being turned in my favor with how fast my runs were getting. Firstly, I committed to playing with the blind skull on, and I have a little sticker on my screen to line up where my invisible reticle was. But essentially by activating the blind skull on the level prepare to drop, you can skip the tutorial and you can get about a 20-second time save on this level just by not having that on, which can be a big deal that would give me a little bit of an extra buffer if I was slow somewhere. At this point, my coastal highway time was nowhere near Hark's 7:58 or whatever he had, and Rylam's near 8-minute time that he can pull off that level, so any little time save would help. From there, for the most part, it was just little tiny time saves along the way, beating things a couple of seconds faster here or there, having better RNG on Oni Alpha Site. I did finally have to learn the Kazinga Banshee hijack, and I went this whole alternate way of trying to line up my thing for that, and it wasn't always the cleanest, but it worked. And I think I dedicated like 2 full afternoons to just trying to get good at Data Hive, because this level is just a run killer. With how many walls you can randomly bounce into and die, it is the hardest level to master besides maybe the coastal highway triggers. But eventually, after a ton of practice, I did manage to pass Rylam's impressive 33:25, and I got my own 33:06, saving about 19 seconds on the overall run, which, as you can see, why that 20-second time save at the beginning did end up playing a big role in that later on. Practicing some more even after that, I ended up trimming the world record down an extra 19 seconds, getting a 32:47, and then finally on August 19th, I'd beaten my time again with a 32:22, saving 25 more seconds. I was already really proud of just being able to play through the game solo, but still in the back of my mind, I felt like we needed to take a look at the co-op runs a bit more now that I had a lot more experience and speed and skill when it came to Halo 3 ODST Acrophobia. So I actually looked at all of the numbers of our personal bests plus my solo best times and compared them to the interesting co-op run that was submitted, and interestingly enough, if we managed to save some time in certain places and we really ran like practically perfectly all the way through, there was a chance that we could start to get times that were very close to the times that the other players had gotten. So we went back at it one more time in co-op and literally spent weeks practicing away at trying to refine our time down, bringing in different friends to run ODST with us, because we noticed that having 4 players could likely help us out more often than it would hurt us when we normally would only play with 3 people. And after a lot of refining, we finally had the groundwork or the framework together to possibly have what it takes to at least attempt to get a run that would be faster than Dice Hark, Zephyrix, and Aster Velez's. So this is the run that we came up with. First and foremost, before we even go into the run, one thing that we kind of said we would talk about later on in the video, it's time we talk about it. Loading triggers, I believe they're called, or load zones. They play a big role in Halo 3 ODST. If you look at this greatly drawn diagram that I've made, essentially for many of the levels in Halo 3 ODST, let's say you imagine each load zone as a gate or a door. For completion of most ODST levels, you have to go through every single door in sequential order to be able to trigger the end of the level. So even with Acrophobia, being able to just fly out of bounds, you can't always just fly straight to the end of the level and expect the level to accept that and let you progress forward. This plays a big role in co-op though, because since there are multiple players, you can send one player through a load zone and have another player flying ahead to prepare for something else coming up later on. Now this doesn't necessarily apply on Prepare to Drop, the first Mombasa Streets level, where essentially we had to get really good at manipulating where everyone was spawning in and having player 1 stand up by this little crack in the wall here and have all the other players die at the same time, forcing a simultaneous respawn where there's not enough room to load in a second player and one of the players bumps through the other side of the wall. From there, there, another player will respawn on that player, fly up out of bounds, line up with this window, and go ahead and grab the helmet, and you can clear this first level in under 20 seconds. Matter of fact, we had gotten it as low as 13 seconds when we were doing this, but in general, since the lineup for this first level was tricky and usually took us multiple tries, we were okay with anything under 20 seconds to at least begin our run. Teari Plaza was an interesting level. There is a strategy that we do in solo where we go through most of the level, then just fly up out of bounds at this shield, fly over, and hit the trigger at the end. However, in co-op, you can fly out of bounds right away at the beginning of the level and fly straight to the end. However, the way that the loads work in this game, you have to be hitting all of the loads in sequential order, which brings us back to that diagram that we just showed you. So what we ended up doing was I would fly out of bounds at the very beginning while Luke would fly inbounds, triggering the brutes to spawn in, the jackals to spawn in, and then he would have to hit the door at the end to cause the back section of the level to load. If he did all of those in order, I could actually trigger the next load zone from out of bounds, loading in Dare's pod, and fly down and hit the pod, and we were able to get this time down to 15 seconds for individual level, which was world record, or typically when we were doing our runs, we would get it in 16 to 20 seconds. The next Mombasa Streets level was interesting because you can do a spawn bump, just like the wall on Prepare to Drop. If all of the players besides one player die at the same time, there's not enough room to respawn the player, so one player will spawn outside of the window, and they're kind of stuck there, but then if we do the same trick a second time right afterwards, one of the players could spawn on the ground level, and we could get out of the building without having to fly down the stairs if we pull this off quick enough. From there, by this point, I will happily say I learned my way through Mombasa Streets with all of my practices in solo runs, so we were able to get a decently quick Mombasa Streets time. Uplift Reserve is interesting. I do really love this trick because it's not that hard to learn, but you just fly over here, grab the Warthog, and essentially drive it up here, and you can break through a barrier, but it does help in co-op if you have another player shoot the back of your Warthog just to give you a little extra push when you're trying to wedge your vehicle up here, and then jump out and you can fly straight to the end of the level. This being one of the few levels in all of Halo history that don't necessarily require you to go through specific load zones, and the only one that matters is the end of the level. Okay, the next Mombasa Streets level, we kind of came up with this little creative way of doing it, but it worked out really well, and we were consistently saving maybe 5 to 6 seconds on this level. Now in ODST speedrunning, it's faster to go from Uplift Reserve to Oni Alpha Site instead of Kazinga Boulevard the way that you normally are probably used to playing it. Just because of the way that the streets are lined up, you can kind of avoid some backtracking by hitting Oni first. But that would mean we'd have to travel through 2 different sectors to get to the Oni Alpha Site load. So what we ended up doing was coming up with a strategy where Luke and I would fly out of bounds at the beginning of this level, and then the players that were playing with us, and in this case it was Willie Asso, you may have seen his videos on YouTube, and our other friend Pringle, who was just like around one day and said, I've never played ODST, but I'll speedrun, and then we taught him everything we knew. They would then split up and help us hit the load points while avoiding the doors altogether. So while Luke and I were out of bounds, they would fly and just stand by the big green door, which would tell ODST to load the next sector without us actually having to wait for the door to open up. They would then die, and by the time they respawned, we would already be at the door, spawning them in by the load zone that would get us to the next part of Mombasa Streets. Once they dropped down and triggered that, Luke would then fly straight to the tunnel that kind of takes a little while to walk through, and I would fly all the way out of bounds, over the wall, and wait for Luke to hit the final load barrier, which would then spawn everything in below me, and I could fly down and grab the trigger, thus saving a couple of seconds that you normally have to sit there waiting for the door to open up, going through the level the ground route. Oni Alpha Site is a little bit interesting. There's kind of a big timer associated with this level. You can probably do things a little faster than we did in some cases, but for the most part, we hit the switches, we wait around, we blow up the bridge, we wait around, we go inside the walls, we wait around some more, we kill everything. Once everything that we have to kill is killed, you only have to kill the first 2 waves of enemies, this door will open up and you can head inside. Then we get into a really big game of RNG. I fly outside while Luke flies up the elevator, hitting a sequence load that we need to cause all of the enemies and vehicles to spawn up top, which will allow us to end the level later. And once he hits that, it's pretty much up to me to fly up this wall and hope that the game hasn't loaded a kill barrier here. Now, nobody really fully understands how this works. It's assumed that it's some sort of falling death barrier that has a tick rate associated where it checks to see if your player is falling or not. And if you time it just right, you may be able to bypass through it, or if you time it when it's not checking, you could bypass through it and go straight to the top. However, nobody's found a consistent way to regularly get this. So it kind of just becomes an RNG thing where you die and you try again. And hopefully you get it in your first like 3 tries and your run is alive, or you get bad luck and you have to start your run all over and roll again next time. If the run was going well, I would get it, and then I would try to quickly load in everybody up by the elevator. But since the whole firefight section on the roof is actually mostly on a timer, if you kill just a couple of enemies, it was faster for me to not respawn them if the game's just not letting them load in, and just go straight for trying to take out the few enemies I need to trigger the Pelican to fly in and end the level. Okay, Kazinga Boulevard. At this point, while we could do the Banshee strat, we found a better strat that works okay enough in co-op that saves some time. Essentially, right off the bat, we split up. Luke is in charge of flying straight to the door while I fly out of bounds, and we have to time ourselves moving forward at the same time so it doesn't teleport us randomly. And as we get into the next area, Luke's hitting all of these load gates essentially down below that are required for the level to progress, and ends it by hitting the one behind Dutch. From there, I can hit the door on the other side, hitting the next sequence you would normally hit, and then hit this little incline, and that would then cause Dutch to teleport inside along with everybody else in our team, and the final firefight would begin, which is kind of on its own timer. We're able to skip a pretty big chunk of this level, making this section not that hard. And then we get to NMPD HQ, the level that those guys got 3 minutes and 3 seconds on somehow, and we still don't fully understand how this level works. Though, I will say, we finally started making progress on understanding the intricacies and meta of this level. And this level is so confusing because there's so many different configurations of what you can face off against in the final firefight holdout when you're on the helipad that has drastic implications for how long this level will take. In a lot of our practices and just testing things out, we regularly were getting over 5 minutes long in the firefight, and that was us speeding through as quickly as possible. Yet somehow we were gonna have to get a time at least somewhat competitive with the 3:03 that they got. Now, fortunately, we were getting really fast at some of these other levels, coming up with new strategies along the way, so we had been giving ourselves some buffer time, but there was no way we were gonna get world record if we were continuously getting times close to 5 minutes when it came to this level. We really needed to be able to regularly get times under 4 minutes to even stand a chance at attempting for world record. NMPD HQ is a very difficult level because of this firefight, and we ended up having to watch multiple guides from multiple speedrunners, ask people specifically to just try to get even a feel on what you're supposed to do to get the fastest time possible here. Essentially, there's 4 waves of phantoms that will fly in during the firefight section holdout thing here at the end, and typically you either take out the phantoms or you let the phantoms fly by and that ends the wave. However, based on how many banshees are flying in the vicinity at the end of the wave could dictate in some scenarios how long of a wait you have before the next wave begins. You can end up losing 30, 40, 50 seconds in between waves if you don't take out the right number of banshees. However, for each wave, based on what the configuration is, where the phantoms spawn and where the banshees spawn, often has a different number of banshees you need to take out and then take out the phantoms to get the fastest possible time. In other certain configurations, it's more important just to take out as many banshees and just let the phantoms run their course. We spent so much time trying this level, and while it seemed like we would a lot of times play pretty well, our time was never really that good until we started to really get a grasp on how important and how to take on each individual encounter with the Banshees. When we finally were ready to go for real runs of Acrophobia, we ended up splitting the team up into two, where two people were focused on taking out the Phantoms, in this case Pringle and Williasso, where then Luke and I would take out as many Banshees as we could while also counting them out loud so we knew how many total we had and when we would hit the threshold of total number of Banshees needed to be cleared. It's confusing, but for instance, the very first wave, you have to take out 4 Banshees far away from when the Phantom is flying in, and then you could take the Phantom out. That one's not hard. The second wave usually has these 2 Phantoms coming in to drop off enemies, and you want to take them out as quickly as possible, starting from the right one to the left one, and not even worry about the Banshees. The third and the fourth wave are where things get really confusing, and it just depends on what the configuration is. Sometimes we have to take out 6 or 7 Banshees, and if we have 2 Phantoms, it's more important that we just focus on the Banshees and let it run its course. But sometimes if we have a better scenario where there's only 1 Phantom, we can quickly take out everything and save some more time. It seems like more often than not we would get unlucky and get the 2 Phantom configuration, but finally after a ton of practice, even with the situations where we would have bad RNG and have 2 Phantoms, which usually resulted in a slower time, we still were able to save so much time by understanding the mechanics behind this that it was starting to look like our run times were becoming viable if we could get this far in the run and have an okay-ish time on NMPD, especially because we were getting really fast on some of the other levels. When the last Phantom comes in, you have to be very careful to make sure you don't kill it until after the door opens and brutes jump out. You can completely soft lock your run and just no more enemies will come and you're just stuck there until you reset, and that'll kill your run. So once you take that out, then you make sure all the brutes are dead and stand on the surface while the final Phantom flies in that ends the level. And then we were going on to Kikawani Station. Now this is one level that we spent a lot of time crafting our own strategy for based on what tricks would be the easiest to pull off and how the loading for this level works. The main important thing is that while we do a lot of out of bounds stuff on Kikawani Station, we have to make sure we're hitting all of the load sequences in order, or else we won't be able to complete the level at the end. So first things first, we fly from the beginning. I grab a beam rifle and Luke and I grab a Banshees and we fly to this side area where you can kind of wedge your Banshee and boost your way out of bounds. You do a quick flick and you can just jump out of the Banshee here, and as long as you're careful not to get stuck in this little barrier that makes it where you can't fly, you can fly out of the map and get really high up. From there, we both fly over the wall and Luke flies back into the map, hitting this trigger by the red light, which causes a Phantom and a Squid House to spawn in. Meanwhile, I'm staying up on top outside of the map and I fly ahead to the next building room that you typically would go inside, except I'm above it waiting for Luke to go over to the big door, open the door, and fly partway in to load the second half of the level. From there, once the second half of the level is loaded in, I fly straight across and land on top of the third building that you would go inside. And fortunately, there is a respawn area right here where if I kind of fly around or walk around in this area, I can get everybody in the group to respawn on me there. Where at this point, we do something a little bit confusing, but it works out and saves a ton of time. But we have 2 players drop straight down and hit 2 different loading triggers that you have to hit for the level to progress. Then the 4th player flies straight across while I continue to stay out of bounds and fly straight to the right diagonal side and fly in through the exit of where you would typically end the level. I then use my beam rifle and time 3 shots, trying not to overheat my beam rifle to save a little bit of time, and blow up the Squid House, setting off the chain reaction and ending this level. This was one that was really interesting, but once we got really good at running this and we got used to the little nuances of things that could mess up the loadings on this level, we did eventually consistently start to get really fast times on this level, sometimes pulling in times as low as 1 minute 15 seconds, 1 minute 13 seconds on Kikawani Station, which is really good. Alright, then we go to Data Hive, and oh boy is this level interesting. This level is just like a Slam City Slam Fest. The amount of times we've just died in crashing into walls is pretty high, but eventually with enough practice, we did start to get really good at just zooming through the hallways as quickly as possible. We do have to make sure we hit this trigger that's right here when we get to the officer. If you fly over the trigger, he won't say his lines unless you walk back in the hallway. So I always stop and make sure that he starts saying his dialogue before I go down to the lower level. There is this slight chance that for whatever reason, the pathing on the officer could break and he'll be down almost about to drop to the next level where he typically dies, and instead just backtrack all the way up through all the tunnels, all the way into the dark area again to go look at his downed officers. We don't know why this happens sometimes, but it's kind of funny when it does happen, even though it kills our run. But if all is going according to plan, we drop down to the lower level, the officer dies, we continue to fly through. When we get to the buggers at the door, there is a random configuration to how they'll be lined up. Sometimes they're lined up kind of in a group where one firebomb does a ton of damage, but if not, we just kind of throw firebombs, shoot at all the enemies, and try not to kill each other in the process. The door opens with Dare, we fly forward, we do a ton of bobbing and weaving through some pretty tight corridors where you can easily die, so being familiar is important. We kill the brutes. There are certain scenarios you can do to have Dare speed up through this process. It's kind of tricky and hard to manipulate, but it does fall into this big RNG situation. Whether or not Dare's following movement will give you speed up times or lose you a ton of time. But after we go down to the hallway where Virgil is, we then fly back up, meet up with Buck, grab brute shots, take out the buggers, and then we have to push Buck to this door and we wait. Now, if Dare randomly respawns in the room with Buck and Virgil, then the waiting time here could be really quick and you can get an amazing time. But a lot of times Dare will just get stuck up top and she'll still eventually say her dialogue, but you end up losing a lot of time in the process here. And there's probably ways to optimize this or tricks, but there isn't anything consistent that we've come up with yet to guarantee that we get a time under 5 minutes here. We have had amazing runs where we've gotten a 4:45 on Data Hive, and then there's been runs where we have an okay time and it just runs and runs until 5:15, 5:30 sometimes. Then from there, we just fly up ahead, wait in the elevator, Virgil comes, and the level's over. Okay, next we're on to Coastal Highway, and this level, it has some issues. First things first, the main strategy is to do a bump through the door that you typically wait at for Virgil to open before you get to the highway part. Essentially, I just fly over there, I line up and crouch by the middle of the door and trigger a bump sequence where our teammates die and one of them respawns on the other side of the door, automatically triggering the cutscene to take you to the outside part. And then from here, this is where runs typically come to die. Now, fortunately, because I run this level so much solo, I have gotten pretty good at getting this fuel rod gun warthog launch done well, especially because we have cowbell and boom on. It does help. But I fly straight to the end of the coastal highway. I kill this grunt that has a fuel rod gun, I grab it, and then I line up the warthog and I try to launch it out of bounds using a grenade and a fuel rod gun. Meanwhile, Luke is there with me, ready to help shoot the warthog to give it any more movement if it needs movement, and Willie Asso and Pringle are driving down the highway with 2 extra warthogs in case something falls apart, because we're gonna go for this first try and not wait for Dare to make it all the way down the highway and trigger a checkpoint, because that wastes too much time. More often than not, we usually do okay with getting the warthog bounce most of the time. Sometimes we have to use a second or third one, and then sometimes we just get bad luck and it all falls apart. Once the warthog is up on this platform, I have to be careful because there's a death barrier down below and there's an invisible soft barrier up above that pushes the player back and pushes the warthog back. Now, what we've learned is to consistently get this, we want to back the warthog up just enough and then make sure neither the player or the warthog is touching the barrier. If that is the case, we want to make that not happen, make sure the player is not in the warthog and then gets in the warthog and then drives it up to the barrier and quickly jumps out, and you can break through the soft barrier that way, which gives you access to the outer area of Coastal Highway. However, just like the gate explanation earlier, this is the most tedious loading sequence type level, and I'll be honest, if you mess up on hitting these load triggers, the game will automatically teleport you back inside with the rest of your team, killing your run, and it can be very, very specific at times on how you have to hit each load trigger, or else you get teleported and your run dies. Let's just look at the gates real quick. Gate 0, we call it Gate 0 because it's the very first one you do, and technically it's that optional gate because you could force a checkpoint and then do the trick and you don't have to do the load trigger on this gate. But you have to fly and just kind of tap this wall right before you get to this like vertical line type design right here and just kind of slide down and swing your way around. Then you can fly straight across, hitting gates 1 and 2 just by flying right through the middle of them. Gate 3 is very similar to gate 0, except you have to line yourself up differently, as you kind of want to line yourself up with this line and then slide down and not do the swinging type thing that you did on gate 0. Gates 4 and 5 aren't all that bad. Sometimes I trigger a checkpoint on gate 5, but otherwise you can keep going right through the middle of those ones. Gate 6 is interesting because there's 2 load triggers you have to hit. One of them kind of up on the upper platform to make sure that the game loads the tank in, and then the other one is down on this little ramp. You can see the line I line it up with, and you have to kind of fly on an invisible tightrope right into the line, or else you'll teleport into the level. Then from there I fly across and we get to gate 7, which is another hard one. This one, the best way to explain it is I line myself up with this line on the vertical design, and then I inch my way forward without touching the wall that has the line on it. If you touch the wall for whatever reason, it loads you back in. Then we get to this round area where you kind of want to glide on the round part, but not go too fast. If you go too fast, it can mess up the next gate. And if you do make it past the next little half gate that's here, you can force a checkpoint by walking next to the bridge that is from Uplift Reserve. It's good to force a checkpoint because this next gate is also a little confusing, but you kind of want to come up from the bottom and be careful not to hit this load gate the way you hit all the other load gates. It just works weird. Then from there, the worst is over. You can fly back to the next one, hit this load, and fly over just to be safe. Technically, you can fly through in the middle, but I've had it just randomly teleport me there too many times, so I don't risk it. And then you fly over the next wall, and I drop down, trigger the speaking dialogue here, and fly into the final firefight area and spawn my teammates in. From there, the rest of the firefight has to just go quickly, but at this point in our best run yet, we were doing amazing. We had a great time going through all the loads. We had launched the Warthog out of bounds. I did decently at hitting all the load zones without losing too much time. We were at a really good pace, and we actually realized that if we could get just an okay time on this level, we could actually finally take this world record after all of the practice that we went through. So we spread out, we took different sides, and we got ready to fight the following waves of enemies. The first wave has a lot of grunts in it. It wasn't all that bad. Then we have the Jackal wave, which once again was pretty easy. Then we ran into pretty massive problem that likely causes most runs to end. Essentially, because of the out of bounds glitch, there is this chance that the Phantom can crash into the Scarab. Now, if it touches the Scarab, a lot of the times things just continue like normal. The Phantom will fly over, drop the hunters off, no big deal. But this time, the Phantom hit the Scarab and did a complete front flip, which caused the hunters to fall out of bounds, but they were still alive. Now, the level will not progress unless the hunters die, and we won't get the last set of enemies flying in unless we clear out the hunters. So this was scary. We've had runs die similarly in the past, but we were able to somehow manage to throw grenades, shoot fuel rod guns up the highway from inbounds and kill both of the hunters, and we maybe only lost a tiny bit of time. It was definitely going to be really, really close, and the next Phantom flew in, dropping off the final wave of brutes. We killed them as quickly as we could, and then it was just a matter of waiting for Mickey, Dutch, and Romeo to fly in, and it was getting really, really close to the time, but finally they flew in and picked us up, and we ended this level with 8 minutes and 22 seconds. Now, we had an Excel sheet with all of our times in it that did the math for us, so once we punched in the 8:22, we realized that we had in total a 28:22, meaning that we beat the world record by 14 seconds after all of that time. And honestly, this was really, really exciting. There was a long time period where we did not think we would ever be able to compete with real speedrunners who knew all the ins and outs of ODST, and I'm sure that if they wanted to, they could come back and beat our time again, and perhaps at some point someone else will come along and take our time again. But the cool thing was that it gave us a goal to work towards and really focus on making sure that we were playing to the best of our abilities, and we practiced and learned so much along the way. The whole journey and getting to do this with friends was an awesome experience. minutes. No matter what happens next, whether people beat our time in the next couple days or maybe our time sits for a while, we're going to continue to run this and just try to improve our time overall, because there is still a lot of places we can save some time on. And of course, it was cool to be able to be one of the few people who can technically say they've played through ODST in under 30 minutes, even if we're obviously using an Acrophobia skull. Now, interestingly enough, when I was doing the solo runs, I thought the possibility of getting under 30 minutes would be impossible. However, I calculated all of my personal best times for each level, and if I add that up, it's literally 30 minutes even, and I know that I can save more time on Coastal Highway if I was just faster, or if I got lucky on Oni Alpha Site, which means technically a 29-minute solo ODST Acrophobia is possible. Though right now I'm just grinding away at trying to bring my time under 32 minutes and get something in the 31 range. Maybe one day the craziest run will happen where somebody gets the time under 30 minutes. Either way, I love Acrophobia. They now added Acrophobia to Halo Reach. It'll be interesting to see if Halo Runs adds a solo and co-op category for Halo Reach speedruns. We're still hoping Halo 3 one day gets a co-op category, as it only has solo right now. But hey, if you like this video, thank you so much for watching. Make sure you subscribe with notifications on. If you are a longtime supporter of our channel, maybe check out our Patreon. There's a link down below to that. Thanks so much. We'll see you guys next time with a brand new video.